We start this hour with reports of a chemical attack which happened in Syria last year. Now, the U.S. and its allies were very quick to blame on the Assad government, but it's now being called into question. This after emails were released from a whistleblower within the organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. RT's Rachel Blevins joins me now to break all of this down. Rachel, what claim is this whistleblower making, and the timing of this is very suspicious?
Absolutely, Scotty. Well, the whistleblower is claiming that the International Chemical Weapons Watchdog misrepresented facts and undermined its own credibility with the findings it released last year. Now, WikiLeaks published an email from an unnamed investigator with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, who was part of the fact-finding mission into reports of a chemical attack in Syria. He sent a message to his superiors in which he expressed grave concerns about the report that was released to the public. Now, the investigator claimed he was struck by how much the modified report misrepresented the facts. He said many of the facts and observations from the team on the ground were selectively omitted from the final report, and he argued that an unintended bias had been introduced which undermined the report's credibility. Now, reports of a chemical attack that killed dozens in Douma, Syria were made on April 7, 2018. The U.S. and its allies were quick to place the blame on the Syrian government before investigators from the OPCW even had a chance to set foot in the area. And just 1 week later, the U.S., the UK, and France came together to launch more than 100 airstrikes against what they called chemical weapons facilities in Syria on April 14th. Now, at the time, leaders from the three countries claimed they had sufficient evidence that the government of Syrian President Assad was behind the chemical attack. But Assad has denied any involvement, and the letter from an investigator who was on the ground in Douma raises questions about just how much influence other countries had in the final report from the OPCW. Now, while the organization claimed the chemical attack was carried out using canisters that were dropped from above, which would have pointed to a culprit with an air force, reports have noted that it took investigators from the OPCW nearly 2 weeks to reach this site of the reported attack, which left plenty of time for the evidence to be tampered with. In his letter dated June 22, 2018, the investigator noted that the redacted report that was made public states that the gas was likely released from the cylinders, but the original report purposefully emphasized the fact that although the cylinders might have been the source of the suspected chemical release, there was insufficient evidence to affirm this. Now, he is also alleging that the changes were made at the request of the Office of the Director General. And as this letter was released during the organization's annual conference, the Director General said in his opening speech that he expressed his confidence in the report that was released.
It is in the nature of any thorough inquiry for individuals in a team to express subjective views. While some of these diverse views continue to circulate in certain public discussion fora, I would like to reiterate that I stand by the impartial and professional conclusions reached by the fact-finding mission.
Now, Scotty, the Director General, did not specifically address that letter that was released, and he also didn't point to the claims and confirm that they were true or that anything was changed in that report that was released.
Well, it'll be interesting, Rachel, to see if this goes any farther than what we know now. Thank you for covering.
Thank you.
To Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute, Daniel McAdams. Thanks, Daniel, for joining me on this. You know, when this was released over this weekend, I immediately thought of you, as you and I have talked about this area and the disinformation that has been spread amongst this conflict. When you read this, and let's go back a little bit in history, since you and I were not necessarily talking at that point, we weren't friends on air yet, were you confident in the United States and the UK intel when they launched the missiles at Syria back in 2018?
No, because it was just a couple of days later, and they said, oh, we know for sure, we know who did it. Nikki Haley, our illustrious former ambassador to the UN, said Russia's bloody hands are all over the Syrian children and these sort of things, and President Trump said that they're going to get it. They didn't have the information, or if they did, they faked it. The question is, you know, was it incompetence or were they complicit, people like Nikki Haley involved in it?
Well, and that's the question. So you mentioned a couple of things. Obviously, it was the timing, that it was so quick to react. Were there any other red flags? So I'm looking at how do we go forward from this when we see these types of attacks and this type of rapid response? What are some other red flags that we as viewers should be watching to go, wait a minute, I think we're moving way too fast on this issue?
Well, the fact that the inspectors hadn't even arrived yet when the U.S. lobbed in 100 missiles, and President Trump lobbed 100 missiles, costing, by the way, about $1 billion wasted. But there's plenty of red flags, the haste with which this was done. But, you know, what these whistleblowers have said is incredible. It's not just one. He speaks for a group of them who said that the final report is in no way what we found, what we concluded. There were so many different things in the report. The fact that they said, yes, there was chlorine gas present, but they failed to mention the fact that it was in parts per billion, which is what you would find in any household, yours and mine. Scotty, when we clean our house, it's got this much in it. So they took out that part. They took out the part where Ian Henderson, the ballistics expert for the OPCW, said pretty likely that they moved the canisters there. They weren't dropped from the air. They took out the part where it said the video that the white helmets made showing all of these people suffering. Well, that was inconsistent with the kind of reaction you'd have with this chlorine gas that they said was there. So many inconsistencies, plus the pressure that was put on the inspectors. This is what the whistleblower told us. Pressure put on the inspectors from unnamed U.S. government agents who showed up on scene saying, you better come to this conclusion. The whole thing stinks to high heaven.
No kidding, Dan. And you know what? Those are not just being left out. Those are very important facts that obviously led to a major airstrike that was not only expensive, but cost lives. I just have to wonder who benefited from the misreporting if it turns out to be true and these things being left out.
Well, Raytheon benefited because we had to buy a bunch of more missiles, you know, so they're quite happy about it. But, you know, the funny thing is everyone, the Democrats, when they want to impeach Trump, you know, this is something you should be impeached for doing something like this. But guess what? The Democrats are just as in favor of this. In fact, it was Obama that launched the operation against Assad in the first place. So they're all in on this. They love bombing other people. That's okay, you know. So this is the hypocrisy of the American duopoly.
Well, and once again, we're finding that this is an internal email that was first released on WikiLeaks before it was reported by other news outlets. Do you think this is ultimately why people want Julian Assange continues to be incarcerated so that his voice will be silenced? And possibly we're finding out WikiLeaks continues to live on even if Assange isn't at the helm.
Yeah, that's true. But, you know, I did a Google search. I knew what was going to happen. I did a Google search about this. And the mainstream media is just not covering it all. What coverage there is from places like Agence France Presse, they're saying, oh, well, the Russians and Syrians are just trying to muddy the water. This is more Russian disinformation. So, you know, our own Soviet media, which never covers this, forget about it. You're not going to see it. Thank goodness for Peter Hitchens, a decent journalist, a decent human being in the Daily Mail who wrote this up. Otherwise, in the mainstream media, you're just not going to hear it here.
Once again, it takes courage to expose the truth sometimes, and sadly, that truth might not put our government or any government in the best light, but the truth shall reign in the end. Thank you so much for joining us, Daniel. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scotty.
It's hard to clear through the debris and get right down to the nitty-gritty that is real news.
New details are coming to light in the case of Jeffrey Epstein as more
Spread between the 2-year Treasury yield and the 10-year Treasury yield.
Several hundred students are staging a sit-in.
the Amazon rainforest, and the blame game is underway. It's time for RT America. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button.